other thing being equal. Other thing being equal, they had to make extra effort to be recognized, because their language was not quote unquote precise. They were explaining far too many things. They were not focused, not far too focused. They were not far too. They had too much. They could see too many dimensions at the time, which is a wonderful. I mean, if we want word to be more holistically driven, then there will be a need for that kind of a understanding. The problem with this notion is that this can also be used for exploitation. So I did a study in Ahmednagar some years ago on women moneylenders, 1983-84. And I wanted to see whether women moneylenders were kinder, benign, more compassionate than men moneylenders. They weren't, simply because they had more information. They had more inside information about which utensil the lady had still in the house. She said, no, you have something, you have that vessel in your house, why don't you bring that? I have dialogues of these borrowers and women moneylenders, and this was a very shattering experience for me, because I had a stereotype in my mind, and that stereotype was broken that day, that is through that empirical work, because she had more information about what the borrower had in her house, from whom had he or she borrowed what, because the grapevine was quite strong, and they discussed these things, who had purchased what. The women want to tell about these things. So this knowledge was available in the society. She used that knowledge to make sure that her loans were secured, more secured than the loans of the men. So she could, so therefore it was more exploitative, if I may use that phrase. She was probably more exploitative than the man moneylender would have been. So it is not necessarily true that women would use this knowledge of being able to see interconnections always for a benign purpose. It is a socio-political context in which different women and different men will use this knowledge differently. But evolutionary, from pure simple biological point of view, we know that certain tools were denied. There is a very interesting book, Mothers and Daughters of Invention, by Autumn Stanley. And in this book, she wrote this book in 13 years, looking at the data of US Patent and Trademark Office, and she analyzed 200 years history of patents in US, and found out, tried to analyze what kind of inventions women patented. 200 years data, 13 years of work, amazing work. And tragedy is that this work, I was recently in Max Planck Institute in Munich, and I asked people sitting in the Intellectual Property Academy of Germany, which is one of the most respected authorities. I said, how many of you have read this book? Not one. I asked this question in Harvard. How many of you, in a very big meeting where a lot of people, professors were sitting? Not one. So it's very strange that this book has remained very obscure, even though being on such a topical subject. What did she find? She found that the share of women was 2% till 80s. 2%. And then she went to ask further questions. Why is it 2%? Is it that the women cannot handle complexity? So then she showed patents for very complex machines. For example, the first powered loom, the COBOL language, or COBOL or Pascal, one of the computer language, was designed by a lady inventor. Babbage, what was that? Yes. So there were a lot of such inventions which have shaped the way word has evolved by women inventors. But then she found that even in US, women were deferential. They gave credit to men many times for their inventions. They gave the name of their husbands. So there was no distinction as far as complexity, ability to process complex information is concerned. There was no disadvantage that women had. But they didn't have as much access to the tools, to the laboratories, to the workshops, to the peer group. That was the reason that they couldn't demonstrate that proven advantage that they could have, not because they didn't have the capability to think. So what I am trying to say is that when somebody is not able to understand a phenomena, it need not be because the person cannot process the information, but if person has not been given the tools to process the information, then person feels handicapped. and therefore is not able to do justice to that. Yes?
Can this relate to the concept of property, or the tool of knowing what property is, or owning property? In many societies, women have been denied the right to vote as well as own property or hold loans or anything in their name. Patents is just another form of property. Is this?
Well, in India till 1985, and I wrote a report on that when I was working on credit policy, a woman borrower wouldn't get a loan without husband's signature. A husband would get a loan without woman's wife's signature. Even if it is a clean loan, that means if there is no issue of property. So, and this was corrected only about 12-15 years ago. That recommendation which we had made way back in 85, Deputy Governor Reserve Bank Ramakrishna was in the chair, was accepted much later, 20 years later. But what I am trying to say is that for such a long time, they did not even have a circular, so that even on the statutes there was no rule by which we could say that women are not required to give obligant guarantee of their husband. It was understood. So yes, you are right that there are structural, but I am not getting into that at just now, because I want to remain at the more abstract level. In the abstract sense, the fact remains that tools which they evolved and tools which they got access to, and tool making tools, blacksmithing, carpentry is a tool making process. If you don't have access to tool making process, then how do you create tools? Even if you know that there is a problem in the technology. So there is a need for us to now, we will have a, we have a break for 5-7 minutes, I would like us to reflect that this volition that got built, volition means choice, ability to exercise choice, and we will see that this is one of the most important factor in the evolution of societies. If you constrain the choices structurally through institutions, through arrangements, through rules, then no matter how smart the mind is, no matter how capable the brain is, you can only process information which is being allowed to be filtered to you, to the information that you can access within that boundary that has been drawn. So that Lakshman Rekha, in our scriptures there is a story of how Ram drew a boundary which Sita would not cross, lest she falls prey to demons. But it's a metaphor, very powerful metaphor, where the ruling class or the protectorate or whosoever it is has drawn boundaries. You will not cross this line. You will not cross this line. This is the line. This is where you should be. Such lines we don't find for men in the scriptures, in the consciousness. We don't find such lines. So there is something to be said about the boundaries that have been drawn. But not going further on that issue, our interest now is that given the fact that okay, we can make some tools, what kind of tools and technologies evolved in societies where languages evolved much faster and much more in a mature manner compared to societies where language did not evolve much. So if you look at number of words in different languages, why do some languages, some communities evolve more words for the same phenomena, and why do other communities evolve less words for the same phenomena? So we will now look at, we will go from volition Why do we need choice? Because there is a lot of variability. Any phenomena has inherent variability. There is nothing constant. And when there is a variability, you have to use some ordering principle to reduce the variability. So you divide that into different classes, different categories. There are a whole range of statistics which has evolved to manage variability in a phenomena. But the fundamental is that if there is a variability in a phenomena, you need to be able to see whether it is systematic or random. The first choice that you have to make, whether variability is random or systematic. So, whether residual errors are distributed, how they are distributed in a equation. How did societies evolve ways of reducing variability? We will look at that after tea break.